Hey, this is Erb N Dub. I'm here today at DBS Music. I'm going to be covering drum and bass, how I make tunes. I'm going to go through some of my tracks, pull them apart, and just show you how I make music. I want to go through a track which I released, I think it was July last year, something like that, called Punk Rock, which done really well, had a lot of Radio 1 support. Cool. So it's not like your sort of typical drum and bass. It's not just like a rolling bass line. I wanted to make it like sound like a band's playing it. That's why I went in on the sort of drum programming slightly different and kind of made all the basses fit with the kick drum. So it was all sort of working together in unison. So let's first of all have a look at the drums. And these are all the drums here. So what I do is I tend to make, 10 different versions of a kick drum. Bounce out all these different versions and keep adding them to the track and see which one fits better. Like, I might take the same kick and re-EQ it or distort it a little bit or, saturate it in a way and then just keep adding different kicks to the project until one sits nicely. Then I can just sort of do little adjustments to it, a tiny bit of EQ. So you've got one here. I'm just going to put a loop here. Let's have a look at the actual channel. So there's nothing going on it. I obviously was happy with the sound of it when I imported it, and I've layered another kick with it, which I'd processed as well. It's called Lows. It's just a bit more bottom end with it. So, the reason I like this kick is it's kind of got a nice bottom end that's rounded, but it's also got a nice sort of top end to it that would come out through the mix. So let's have a look at the snare as well. So this is a snare that I've been processing and making through lots of different tunes. And it's kind of got like a nice tail to it and a nice bit of weight. So there's nothing on the actual channel. You've got like, if you zoom in, you see here, this section here, this is what you call a transient. So you've got quite a on the waveform, you've got quite a definite transient. And then when I made this, I layered up a snare, a clap, and some white noise. So the tail of the snare, which has got a fade on it, is actually a white noise sample, which gives it that kind of like tail to it. If I was making it shorter, I'll just quickly adjust it. It's going to completely change the sound of the snare drum. Just put a little fade on it. It just becomes like a normal kind of like snappy drum and bass snare. However, there's no processing on the actual channel, but on the mixer, I've sent it to a group channel, or in Logic you call it a bus. And on the snare here, I have done some EQing. So it's just to pull out, let's solo it actually, pull out some of the frequencies to make the snare jump through the mix. So this could probably come over a little bit actually. It's probably where I was repitching the snare. So it's taking the fundamental frequency and giving it a boost. I think it's around 200 hertz. Yeah, 200 hertz. And that's like the key of A, I think, something like that. So when you're making a tune, it's really important to tune your drums to the same key as your tune. And to do that, you can, I don't know, I do it with, you can even do it with the Cubase EQ. When you move it around here, it gives you the notes up in the top. Up here, you can see some notes. Well, now it's down the bottom for some reason. Now it's back up the top. You know, I can put an EQ point there, and when I'm tuning the drum, up or down, the fundamental frequency will move around. I'll give you an example.
Can you change the pitch with like a transpose?
Yeah, you can do that, but like in Cubase, let me undo that snare. If I just did it with the transpose in Cubase, kind of ruins the actual sound because it's almost like time stretching it. The best way to do it is either put it in a drum machine or in Cubase you've got like an actual pitching tool which is in process and pitch shift, whatever. Don't know what that means. So let's try it again. Process. Doesn't want to let me do it. I'll try it one more time. This is a brand new Mac, and it's a brand new version of Cubase. It's saying there's some sort of problem. New version. No, it's not letting me do it. But basically, if you took this and put it in like a drum sampler, it would pitch it up real time, as in like, you know, like on a keyboard, if you put it in and played it along a keyboard, it'd pitch up. If I just use this transpose thing here in Cubase, it does it in a time stretching sort of way, and it kind of ruins the transient and ruins the original sound. So you're better off pitching it properly rather than just transposing it. However, saying that, I'm going to just use the transpose so we can tune this drum. So say if I wanted to tune it up to, let's look on here, an A, I can put an EQ point on A, and now I can see that. So when the fundamental frequency, the main frequency, so I've only transposed it by 2, it's now in tune to the key of A, and if I was writing in A, then I've now got the snare in tune. Does that make sense? It's really important. Kick drums I find really hard to tune because they're like low frequencies, and I can't actually see the fundamental when I look at it. Like when you look at this kick here, it's not so obvious as what I was just showing you with the snare drum. Like here, it's kind of a C-ish, you know, area. It's just not as obvious, so I find I have to just tune the kick drums by ear. Cool, does that make sense? Okay, right. Let's put that back to where it was.
Did you do the same to like your cymbals and your hi-hats?
When I made them originally, I would have made them in, let's go down to them. I would have made them in, like, for instance, let's check this. No, this one? Yeah, I kind of made them in Addictive Drums and then reprocess them in Ableton. And when I was making them, I was probably making them by ear, kind of just pitching them up, you know, naturally until they sounded good. So they're probably roughly around the right pitch. But again, it's quite hard to see the actual real fundamental frequency of it. There's no definitive sort of area where I'm like, okay, that is a, you know, a G or whatever. So it's kind of like trial and error and just do it by ear. If we take the drums and solo them so you can hear them all together. And I've messed up some of the pitching, which I think is that. Put that back to 0. Now the snare sounds well over the top because I did actually put this EQ spike on it. And maybe if I turn the limiter down a bit on the master, might help. Okay, so that's the drums as a whole. I've also on the snare used like a transient shaper, and the transient's just giving it a bit more of a, like, sort of an attacky first part of the sound, just so it cuts through the mix more. And then I use this Camel Crusher tool, which I kind of use on everything. They discontinued it, I think, because it's a Logic bought Camel Audio. And I don't know that if they did the Camel Crusher or Camel Fat anymore.
No, not on the 64-bit, is it?
No, I was lucky. I bought the Camel Fat 64-bit just, a couple of months before they went bust. So I'm quite fortunate. I can still use it. But this tool, I use it like a clipping tool. It won't let anything go above 0. So if I can just drive stuff into it, and I won't clip my channels, which I find really important. But we can come back to that in a second. So yeah, it's on there. So I've actually used a bit of the effects from the Camel Crusher, a bit of tube. Tube distortion's quite nice sounding. It's not as harsh as, like, I don't know, like guitar distortion, for instance. So you get tube microphones. So tube distortion can be your friend. I use it on lots of stuff because it adds extra harmonics, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. There's this mech setting as well. Without anything, with a bit of compression, without tube. Let's solo the snare again. It's cool, but as soon as you start adding some tube, it starts to sound fatter and louder and a bit of compression. And sometimes, or a lot of the time, when you add distortion, it might, as long as you've got a lid on it, like a clipping tool or a limiter, the distortion will make something appear louder, even though it's not getting louder in decibels. Does that make sense? Because it's actually adding more harmonics, adding, more harmonic content through distortion. So it's kind of an illusion. So say if something's sitting at 0 dB and we add a load of distortion to it, it gets louder on our ears, but it's still sitting at 0 dB. You're kind of winning there because you're making the sound fatter. Just turning it up doesn't, you can't get anywhere with it. You end up clipping channels and stuff like that. So lots of amounts of subtle distortion help massively in your production. I use like tube distortion on cymbals as well. I use a lot of distortion on basses and stuff like that. I'll give you a quick example actually. If I solo, I think there's a massive sub in this. I'm gonna just take that, stretch it out. If I was to add a Camel Crusher to it, or any distortion, but we're just gonna use the Camel Crusher, open up an analyzer, get this as well. So there's the sub playing. You can see it's all just sub frequencies really. It's rolling all the way, it's kind of, all of this is inaudible. So say to about, I don't know, 200, 250 hertz, it's kind of what you can hear. But if you add tube distortion to it, or even the mech, you can see all the harmonics start to pick up. And you can actually hear it. So it's making the sub fatter. It's not necessarily making it louder. It's giving it more harmonic content. Let me just double check the sub. Where's the sub? Over here. If I was to put the Camel Crusher at the end of my group because there was an EQ there, it'd make an even bigger difference. Hold on. See all the extra harmonic content come in. It's almost too much. However, if you went to the actual synth itself, like massive here, I'm only using one wavetable, one oscillator, and it's called a sine square. So it does the same thing. A sine wave is nice and smooth, and a square is kind of flat. You all know what a square is, right? The square wave. So all the distortion is doing is really taking the sine wave, the Camel Crusher, and turning the sine wave into a square. Yeah, so it's actually affecting it in a way, so it's changing it from a nice looking sine wave into a square wave. So Massive has it built in with this oscillator. You can literally just scroll through the wavetable position. Let me just take Camel Crusher off. So if I play it, it's a similar sort of effect, just going from a sine to a square in Massive. But you know, you get different types of effects and every distortion is different and you end up with different characteristics. Paul, does that make sense? Excellent. So distortion is your friend, little amounts of it. Like, for instance, I don't know, big mixing desks. They have saturation built in, a little bit of distortion. It's got a sound. That's why everyone goes on about SSL and Neve desks. You're actually you're listening to the harmonic content of the desk and the way the EQs work and stuff. That's why we all like vintage gear. And there's loads of plugins out there to sort of emulate it. So back to the drums. I'm just gonna go to the group channels. So on my mixer here, I'll just explain it. These aren't audio channels, these are group channels. All the ones here that are blue, these are where I've bussed everything really. And the sort of purpley ones, they're like my effects sends. So I will solo the percussion. Yeah, I've even put a Camel Crusher on it here. Just a slight amount of compression and a little bit of tube. But you know, it's not harsh distortion. Actually, I add some sort of nice content to it. I've used this plugin here by Alloy to tidy up the percussion, and I've put it in. You've got lots of different sort of things you can do here, from exciters to dynamics, like compression and EQ. I've put it into using the transient mode, and I've put it into a multi-band mode. Normally it'd just be standard like this, but you've got your lows, mids and tops here, and then you can shape the sound really, so you can make it less, you know, the mid-range here, or the upper mids, you know, I can shorten the sustain, and I can adjust the attack of it, and just sort of tidy up the percussion as one. I like working with groups because, yeah, you could spend all day EQing a hi-hat or whatever, and then you put it in a mix and it can sound awful, but on its own it can sound great. But if you've got all your percussion, all bussed or grouped in one place, and you're treating it as a whole, you can get a really good sound with it. Especially if you don't solo your groups, you kind of keep the tune playing, or at least all of the drums playing, and mix that way. You know, I used to spend ages just like, you know, I'm going to make snares today, and you just spend ages making a snare and put it in a tune, and it just never sound right. So you've got to be aware of these things. So, you know, making group channels and EQing and compressing the group channels is where you're going to get the sound from, not the individual elements. Does that make sense? Okay, you're going to need good elements to start with though. You know, if you've got a bad sounding hi-hat, a bad sounding snare, I'd say 99% of the time you're not going to get it to sound great. You need good samples to start off with, however you get them, however you make them or whatever. So, and there was just a bit of side chaining. You all know about side chaining, right? The side chaining is just ducking. It's set up in a way where a compressor is just ducking the volume when I tell it really. And in this instance, it's when the kick and the snare hit, it ducks the percussion. So let's put it all together. You'll see. Wrong one. I think it's just doing it on the snare. Just make sure that I'll turn that down a little bit. So that's the drums, really. They do get sent out to like a parallel bus. You know about parallel compression? Yeah? Okay, if you don't, it's just a copy of the whole drum group, whole drum bus, sent to a send, and I've put a compressor on it and squashed the hell out of it. And hopefully I should be able to just solo it. So I've got this sort of just really nasty sounding drums which I can just fade in when I need to. It's basically backing up the transients, the kicks and the snares of the main drums. And let's look at the actual drum group. I've used another Camel Crusher really just for a bit of tone. I just turned the mech off then actually. And then I put a limiter on it, and the limiter's just squashing the hell out of it. Like, you know, you could use a compressor, but I like using limiters because you can push them harder and I don't end up clipping my channels. I end up sort of like kind of clipping limiters, but it's controlled that way, you know. So how about, have any of you guys made a tune where everything's in the red and it sounds good, but you need to get it out of the red to make it sound excellent, but when you bring it out of the red, the whole tune sounds rubbish? Have you ever had that? Yeah, you know, when you kind of got a good sound and then you can't finish it because it's not quite right. So what that actually is clipping. So clipping's a tool. You use it in everything. So if you're redlining channels and you're in a mix down stage, you kind of like, it's a bit like hit and miss. It might be a good mix down or it might not, because you've got no real control out of it. But what clipping's doing is taking a waveform and chopping sort of the top and the bottom of it off and making it a big block of sound. You know when you load a sample in and it's just like a snare?
It looks like a chocolate bar and sound.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, you know them waveforms that are just a big block?
Yeah.
You know, basically it's like getting a pair of scissors and chopping it off. What the channels are doing is they've got inbuilt clipping really to stop it, to give it some sort of control. Whatever sequencer it is, it has to sort of limit what you're doing, because otherwise, you know, if you're putting something in a channel like 30 dB too hot, what it really should do is digital clipping, as in pops. I don't know if any of you would have heard of that, but when sequencers first come out, when you run something too hot, it would click and pop, and you know, it'd sound horrible. Yeah, yeah. So what they've done now is they've put clipping tools inside their own, in the sequencers, to stop that, and you can kind of abuse the sequencer and get a sound out of it, which is wicked. That's how I used to make music. I used to redline everything and hope for the best. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes I'd have a wicked track, but I could never finish it, because as soon as I brought it all out the red, it just sounded awful. Or the drums would just sound really thin and everything like that. So over a few years, what I found is you can clip stuff using plugins. There's clipping plugins, you know, or you could put limiters on your channels or on your groups and run into the limiter. So, you know, at the end of the day, I can turn the limiter up or down here, rather than when I bring the channel down, it affects the sound. It doesn't affect the sound because I'm driving the limiter, which is giving me that sort of pumping, clipping sound. Even if it's just a snare going into it, it's squashing it into a block. But then I've got a volume control. Sorry?
You can redline a quiet sound, basically.
You can redline anything, yeah. And that's kind of like what you do in neurofunk and a lot of music now, you know. Clipping was really, you know, invented with tape. They used to run tape a bit hot to get a sound, you know, and then it kind of just sort of developed from there. Have any of you guys heard of an artist called Dillinger? Yeah. He's an old drum and bass artist, yeah. Right, he makes the sickest drum and bass, or used to. I don't know if he still makes tunes, but...
He put some stuff out, I think. He put some stuff out.
He put out like a new tune quite recently, and I was really surprised because it did not sound like old school Dillinger. It sounded quite like
I think probably what's happened.
No, it's more like, you know, like neurofunk kind of roller, like, I don't know, something like Spore or Calyx and TV or something like that.
Did you like it?
It was, yeah, it was real nice.
Okay, so what Dillinger used to do was clip the hell out of his mixing desk. He'd redline it and get a sound. He'd get all that unwanted distortion and everything, and then record it back in, or whatever he'd done. I don't know the details of it. But he'd use clipping to his advantage. You know, when I was a kid and I heard a Dillinger record, it'd blow my mind. But there's only so far you can go with out-of-control productions, so you have to kind of try and rein it in. And this is what we've been doing with clipping tools. So you have to bear with me a moment, because it's saying my MacBook's running out of battery. So we might have to have a break in a minute already. So we've got 12 minutes left. Well, 12% left. So yeah, clipping. I've got a clipping tool even on the master here, but we can get to it. That's just one that I bought because I wanted to find a clipping plugin. I'll show you actually. You can see it on the... I'll turn this down. If I drive it harder and harder, it's saying it's clipping the track by 8 dB now. So it's actually cutting off, you know, it's just making it a block of sound.
How is that different from a limiter?
A limiter just basically draws everything together. It can pull stuff up from the bottom. and push it all the way to the top, yeah, it puts a lid on it, where a clipper will just chop it. So when you're mastering, you can limit, which is probably what you all know about, but clipping's really important as well.
So
You know, if you...
adding harmonics to it, then as you're taking the tops off of, say, a sine wave, clipping it hard, would that add more harmonics like you were playing before?
That would, that's more in a sound design sense, that probably would, you'd end up with like, what, unwanted but wanted artifacts.
That's kind of what Dylan could possibly be doing.
He was creating additional harmonics by running stuff red. Whereas this clipping tool, yeah, it would do that. And so would a limiter. If you run any plugin too hot, it starts to create weird harmonics, even an EQ, because it's got clipping involved in it. It's a really important tool. So, I'm gonna reopen the project because I've adjusted. No, I won't. I'll just drag this down. I think it was something like that. Okay, let's have a quick look at the basses before we go on. We're going to have a break. So we've got a sub here, which is real basic, made in Massive.
Why do you use Massive over Serum? Is there any preference there?
I like the sub sound in Massive. I think it's a bit more solid and it's a bit dirtier. Yeah, I think Serum's very clean. I have used Serum. Oh, and also it changed your processor.
Yeah.
So even just adding Serum as a sub, it's like adding 10 Massives or something. It really just does your computer in.
It's got some oscillator Serum, hasn't it?
Yeah, and you can make, you can use an oscillator to make a sub as well. I've made a few subs, which sound better than just using that sub oscillator. But yeah, it's very processor heavy, Serum. So this, I've got an envelope, I think, yeah, just doing a little pitch dive at the first part of the sound. If I solo it, let's see what happens. If I push this up, it's like, sounds like a weird old computer game or something. If I rein it back in a bit.
You're essentially just making it sound like a kick drum.
Yeah, a little bit. So it gives it that transient hit. So instead of it just being flat, just sub, it has like a start to the sound.
Would you like, if you were doing that with a sub, would you like get up and listen to the kick drum and try and like match the transient, or would you like? No,
if you was making a kick drum, yeah, and we do a bit of that in Serum. But this is just literally, as long as it's got a start to the sound, and if you imagine if you're playing it on a keyboard, you've actually got something to feel. And in a club, it comes across. We've got little speakers in here, but you can still hear it. So imagine what it's like on a 20K sound system. Just that little bit of attack, it makes quite, it thump you in the chest. So it's kind of important. And all it's doing is a pitch dive, a real quick pitch dive. Over-exaggerated it, you could have it on just 1 octave pitch dive. Yeah, or you could just go overboard. There's nothing much more going on in this. You could fatten it up a bit with like a bit of tube. And the computer glitches out. Or, there's not too much more to do. You could add an effects to it, like a camel crusher or some more harmonic content. But really, I didn't need to add too much in this to the sub. I wrote the bass line out of loads of bits of audio, so I spent a good day or two beforehand making just mad basses like this. Hold on, let me play them all. I'll get rid of that box. So.
Was that using Serum or Massive?
It was Serum, and a lot of it was done in Ableton. The reason I write bass sounds in Ableton is because the way you can process and modulate everything in Ableton, you can't really do that in Cubase. So the basses, the top basses are like this. Pretty mental, isn't it?
That's not.
And then you put a sub with it. The sub, let's look at the sub notes. There's not actually that much going on. It's like F, 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 F sharp, F, 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 but it's more about the movement within the sounds that make it sound like you know, they're moving all over the place. It's a lot of it's filtering. So I've got some cool sounds, and I spent a while just automating the filters. So have a listen and just listen to the way they filter in and out. Cool? So they all go to a group and they have a limiter on it and a side chain and, you know, the stuff that we've already covered. They're sent out to a reverb as well, this Valhalla reverb, which I set the decay to. I was thinking when I was making it, how do I figure out the time, reverb times and stuff? So I went online, read up, and, you know, you've got calculators and stuff. I don't understand why they don't have, like, decay sort of that you can click that would sync the BPM, so it just do it for you. But I realised around 84 sounded good and blah, blah, blah. And then I put like an auto panner on it. Oh, have I still got it yet? Take this off. So you're just listening to nothing. Weird bits of reverb. Here we go, let's see if I can turn these off. So they're all panning about. But I put a sidechain on it and sidechained itself off it, I believe. Yeah, so when the basses were playing, it kind of pushes the compressor down. Just made all this weird filth that sat underneath it. But I really liked it because the way there was stuff popping out of each of the speakers, and it added all this depth to the tune. And later on, the bass line changes, and I'd taken a long note and run it through a vocoder. I think it comes in here. Oh, let me take that off. This first like long tail, I think sounded excellent. Oh, turn it down. It's just a long note, and I just moved a load of like EQ positions on a vocoder, then export with the audio. If I didn't export all the audio, I wouldn't be, you know, this project's struggling now because I've got so many different things going on in it. I wouldn't be able to finish this tune. That's unfortunately the limitation that we're finding in music. You have to keep rendering stuff to audio, especially with things like Serum and all the other plugins. So there's like 80 channels on this, but there's probably about 150 at one point. And I keep bouncing and bouncing and bouncing. But on these 80 channels, there's probably a couple of plugins on, you know, there's probably about 100 plugins running at the same time, and probably about 20 EQs that are built in Cubase that are running. And then probably there's about 5 or 6 effects sends, and then there's mastering plugins, and so on and so on. And the computers, they just can't handle it. This laptop costs $2,500, and it can't do anything. I've had to remove loads of stuff. So, you know, it's just the limitations we have, really, and we have to keep rendering stuff. So let's open up Ableton. Let me go to Cubase first. Does anyone in here use Ableton? Okay, cool. Trying to think which one. I'm going to open up this one and see what it is. So I was messing around with some new sounds this week. I've been away gigging, and I was in Thailand for a bit. I took 2 weeks off, and I sold my house and was moving. I literally hadn't been in the studio for over a month. So it's just loading up a load of plugins because I had to install some last night. So I was really eager to get in the studio and make some new sounds. So the first thing I did was open up Ableton, go through some of the old projects I've been making, and find some of the processing chains that we'd been using. So I've been making a lot of the tunes in Ableton with Malux and Chrissy Chris. So I went through some of the projects and I was like, oh yeah, what was that sound and what was that sound? And I ended up taking some of the chains. Another thing to be aware of, if you're making good sounds, try and save all your presets as well, because that punk rock track that was just going through, I can't recreate them basses. I've really tried, and I love them sounds. I just can't get them to sound how I want them. So, and I didn't save the preset. All right. So, let's see. So I'm going to take Serum. I'm going to go through how I use Serum and how I make sounds in it and the processing chain of this particular. I'm going to replace that there.
No.
Sorry?
Is that live 10?
No, it's the old one. Yeah, Live 10 came out yesterday, didn't it?
It looks different.
The skin, that's all, yeah, because it's on TV.
I like that,
It looks better actually than on the TV, doesn't it?
yeah. 10 quite yesterday.
Yeah, I'm interested to check it out. Right, so it's running through a processing chain, which I won't go into too much at the moment. It just makes it sound pretty fat. So let's go through some stuff with Serum. At the moment, it's completely initialized. Let me just double check. Yeah, so I've made a load of presets recently, and I'll just play you some of them. I might actually have to, just quickly before I do that, I'm going to just create a Serum outside of that processing chain. Like here, and then go through some of these presets, because they won't be so distorted then. So there's no processing on that. Or this one.
Cool.
And a few more. So I wanted to make some sounds that I could use straight out of Serum, or I could even resample, reprocess. And I put a sample pack together, and I sold it at Christmas. I just put it online. And it done really well. But I was making the sounds for myself, really, but so many people were asking me, I'll do a Serum pack, can you do this, can you do that? So I ended up doing one, and you know, people have been very happy with it, which is cool. But I also learned a lot more about Serum when I was doing it, because I had to tidy up all the patches and stuff like that. So yeah, there's not actually too much going on in these patches. The best way to explain how I made them was taking, say, one LFO and assigning that one LFO to lots of different things throughout the synth. So basically, the LFO's controlling many things at once. Rather than having like 4 LFOs doing lots of different things, I wanted to do it so they're all in unison. So when there is one movement, things move together. Does that make sense? It's a bit like pushing someone over. If you push them with 2 hands, they're probably going to fall over. You know, if you push them with 1 hand, they might not. Depends how strong you are. But, so this sound here, whatever, it says number 3. You can see it's quite basic oscillator types, basic wavetables. It's not like you've got some weird complex dubstep looking, crazy looking thing. It's actually from, I believe, from the analog thing, somewhere in here. And it's one of the basic wavetables anyway, I can't remember which one it's from. That made up this sound. And if I just turn everything off, turn the filter off, turn the effects off, literally remove everything. It's not like the craziest sound going on there. And this LFO is LFO1, is kind of controlling the level, which is the volume, the wavetable position, so when I press it, I'll play it low down. It's moving the detune, a bit of the blend. And that's it. It's saying I've set it from AM from B. I'm not too sure what AM from B is. I know what FM from is, you know, FM synthesis. I don't know how that works, but I'm not even too worried about that. I was just making sounds. So this is probably more of the core sound. So this has got unison on it. Did you know what unison does?
No.
It takes a copy of the sound, the oscillator, the wavetable, whatever you want to call it, oscillator B that we're working on, makes 16 more of them. And then detunes them slightly.
Get a bit of width.
Yeah, and it pans them for you. So basically, you can get used some plugins that are just, if you put it on a vocal, you could say, I want it to double 18 times or 24 times, and it automatically reshifts everything for you. But if I left the detune up, it'd sound all weird. So you have to bring the detune down. So it still has some sort of, it still sounds like it's in key. And then again, this LFO is moving the level on the wavetable position. So you put them together. Put the sub in. Again, the LFO is moving the level here. The key to it is creating lots of movement, basically. If you want to make interesting sounds, you need movement. If it's just a static sound, It's good, you know, maybe I could just do it here without any movement. Oh, that's really slow movement, but, you know, it would just stay on one sort of pitch, one sort of tone. Let's put the filter in. It's just a low-pass filter, nothing much going on there. Then if you go to the... Let's have a quick look through the other LFOs, see if there is... It doesn't seem to be assigned to anything. No. This might be assigned to a pitch dive. Let me just double check it. This might look confusing if you've never used Serum before, but this is like where you can go and see where all the routing is. Master tune says LFO2. It's not actually set up. But what you can do is, remember we was having a look at the massive sub, and I put that pitch dive on it, you know, where you like gave it that first initial transient, that first hit. If I put that, it's doing it with this, it's doing a pitch. I didn't actually use it, but if I was, I'd make it a lot smaller, so I could just get that first hit. It's not very obvious, but it's there. So, that's it, quite a basic sound. I've twiddled a few knobs, assigned LFO1 to a few things. Oh, there's a noise oscillator as well. Let's double check it. Can't even really hear it, but you will do in a second. You're all following that, right? I haven't confused anyone, no? Because we can start from the beginning with synthesis if we need to, but if you're all following me, it's cool. Okay, the effects section of Serum. I've used standard plugins, really. Hyper, or Dimension, it's like two plugins in one. It's basically a stereo tool. Flanger is a flanger. If you don't know what a flanger is, go and listen to a flanger. Compressor is what? What's a compressor do? Compressors. It squashes the sound together, basically. All compressors work in all different ways. You know, just because you've got one compressor made by Serum, it's not going to sound the same as one made by UAD. They all work in different ways. So you just find the compressors that you like using. This particular compressor I've put into a multi-band mode, so it gives me the 3 bands, like bass, mids and tops. Then I've got an EQ here, which basically messes around with the actual sound. It's a bit like another filter, the way I've used it. And then I've used this comb filter to give it an extra sound. So let's go through them one by one, turn them on. Bit of stereo, probably can't hear it in this room. Flanger, you probably can't hear it in this room. You'll hear this. So what that's doing is that's squashing down and pushing up and all sorts. I can't quite get my head around this compressor. It's based on the Ableton OTT compressor setting, multi-band setting. And if you know about Ableton, use that setting because put it on anything and it makes things sound fat, basically. So the guy who designed Serum basically kind of took their idea and put it in Serum, you know, and if you want to get even fatter, you just turn the gain up. But you can start ruining the sound as well. So let's look at this EQ, which I've used like a filter. Still assigned to the same LFO, and what it's doing is you've got the gain here of the tops and the gain here of, I've created this like notch in it to try and get a resonant sound out of it. Can you see the way it moves? That little spike in it. So obviously the top end's being increased, but also you've got this resonance. If I push that right up, see what happens. It's kind of going warm. If I bring it down a little bit, maybe I'll bring it up, it's a bit more obvious, but yeah, sounds awful. So let's turn it down a bit. So I'm kind of making it talk. Remember where we started, like 5 minutes ago? It was pretty basic. That's the key to making good sounds. If you start with like overcomplicating everything, you're going to have a nightmare. If you start with real basic wavetable types, like a saw or a square, you can shape that into, or even a sine wave, you can shape that into something incredible. If you go and load up all these kind of dubsteppy sort of weird wavetable sort of crazy stuff, you're not going to probably get the results you want. They are particular for dubstep, really, and that kind of sound. You can get interesting stuff, you know, I'm not saying it's... But going back to what we was talking about massive, if you take a sine wave and distort it, it becomes a square. you can't undistort it and go back to a sine wave. Does that make sense? So you need to have a good, solid sound to start with. You can't really go backwards without changing the oscillator type or changing the distortion. You know, if we literally started with a square wave, we've got a square wave. If we started with a sine wave, we can turn it into whatever we want. Whether it's a square or a triangle or whatever, you can process it and do whatever and shape the sound. So the more simple the oscillator, the easier it is to make sounds. Does that make sense? Just remember that, because I used to just like, I'm going in, lads. Do you know what I mean? Watch this. And I'd load up the craziest wavetables with whatever synth it is, because they sound quite good on their own, and you try and make them sound like Noisier or any of your heroes, and you can't. Try it with a sine wave, try it with a square wave, you know, and you will be able to.
Did you use like external plugins as well as the effects rack?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to show you a minute ago when I first loaded Ableton, but it was a bit too much. So we're going to do that in a second. So we have a comb filter on here as well. Let me turn it off. It's just adding a bit of movement. Do you understand the principle of filtering, what filters do? I'm going to give you a little bit more information. So you can see in Serum, which is the advantage of using this over other synths, you can see what the filters do, or the wavetables do even, especially over Massive. So, for instance, if I was to turn it down a little bit, this to a multi, I did change it already. Start messing with it. Play it low down. You can see that way, that's the way that's sweeping through. And it's in time with the LFO. If you got a EQ, made loads of points in it, go away, like this. And played, let me draw a sound, a MIDI note on. Actually, just record it in. Yeah. Don't defy me. Now I've messed it up. Stop doing that. Right. Pen. Pen off. I think this is kind of why I stick to Cubase as well, because even though Ableton is quicker, I'm a lot quicker with Cubase. Hopefully it's a play now. Right, and then legato, and then drop it a couple of octaves. Okay. And I'll turn this off. Right, so that EQ's not on now. But the demonstration I want to show here is this filter type that's doing stuff is essentially the same as an EQ. You can get this EQ, make sure it's turned on, and press play, and move it about everywhere. So, if you learn your filter types, and you can't actually see them, because you can see them in Serum, when you go back to Massive, you know what each one of them do. For instance, a comb filter. You know, just think of it's like EQ points moving around that you can automate. Like, in here, if you go to a comb, you'll see it. If I play a note, you can see, imagine if I tried to draw that of an EQ though, this thing here, it'd be pretty hard to replicate. So this is why filters exist. But a lot of the basic filters, It's just the same as if you got an EQ and automated it. You know, if you got rid of them. Did you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Filtering is essentially just like an EQ. But you can sit and mess around with EQs instead of filters on synths, because you can get some crazy results, especially like this Fab Filter one, because you can create loads of points, highlight them, and then control them as one. So it is like a filter, basically. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to this sound. It's basically complete. I'm going to reopen it. We got this sort of rich harmonic sound that we can mess around with, resample. So let's go through some other sounds. They're following the same principle, just using different wavetable types. These are more complex. Let's have a look at this one. This one's real basic. It's not even scrolling through a wavetable, it's using this static wavetable position. Let's see what it's controlling. Same sort of parameters, really. Level, 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 level. I'm not even using the filter. In the effects section, kind of the same thing again. Just creating better sounds or more interesting sounds using different wavetable types. Does that make sense? Cool. So if we was going to use, hopefully the processing and everything's on here. If we was going to use this and start with a new sound, just quickly copy that MIDI note up so we've got it. Here's that. So like that. This is running through a load of processing here. I'll turn that off. I'm going to delete that. It's running through loads of processing, chaining it out, splitting the frequencies, so you end up with different bands, even just the top frequencies. I'm not going to get too into, but you know, basically there's quite a decent chain built there. And I've added Serum to it already. This is what I was saying. I took one of the chains that we used in one of our other tunes and thought, how about if I just use that chain and start making sounds into it? It's almost like getting a guitar amp with loads of distortion on it and running a sine wave into it and then creating new sounds. So if I was going to create something fresh with Serum, I would start with a basic, that's what we're going to do now. We start with a basic oscillator, go to analog, find something like saw rounded to squares, quite good. I think that's what I was using. No, maybe I wasn't. Maybe drop it an octave. And assign an LFO to the wavetable position. It's normally my starting point. Put it on triggered, so that basically means every time you hit a MIDI note, it plays the sound from the start of this LFO shape. Is that cool? You get that?
Click the LFO and drag it to the wavetable position, and then that modulates that then.
Yeah. See it going through it? If I slow it down, I'll take it off BPM as well, so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some noise straight away. And I like this J106 HP. I'm going to pitch it right up, and I'm going to turn the level all the way down, because I'm going to use this noise to FM modulate oscillator A. So basically I'm sending this noise into this oscillator, and I could modulate that, but maybe I'll use a different LFO. Just see what it sounds like. Slow it down a bit. Take the BPM off. Slow this down as well. Okay. Maybe add another oscillator type to it. Analog. What did I use? Saw to square. What could I use? I always end up using these saws to square or saw rounded. I'm just going to use that. Same thing, put LFO on wavetable position. Maybe modulate the level a bit to give it a bit of movement. Same on this one. Let me speed up the white noise a bit. Okay, it's sounding all right. I could maybe add a filter. Another LFO.
Serum is like its own preset, its own wavetables inside. Would you use it with like Massive as well?
Oh, who's talking? I can't see. Oh, sorry, mate.
Do you just use the wavetables inside Serum, or are you actually using that? Can you use them with? Well, I know you can, or do you use them with, like, say, Massive and that? Because you can actually drop in your own.
You can drop in your own wavetable types, right? So on my Studio Mac, I've got all of Massive's wavetables inside Serum. Serum sounds different to Massive, though. It's just got a different sound. So even if you make the same sound in both synths, I tested it, they sound quite different. They sound like the same sound, but tonally they sound different. There's differences between them. So you can make your own wavetable types. Like if you really want to get into the world of Serum, you can go into here and draw your own in.
And you can get a picture, can't you, and put a picture.
You can put, yeah, I think it's a PNG or something like that,
Yeah,
a file
yeah.
type, and you can put it in. I put my logo in it. And
Custom like wavetable that takes
yeah, so you can do lots of stuff. If you really want to geek out, you can put pictures in it. But all I tend to do is if I'm going to design a wavetable, is do something really basic that morphs into itself. Like, let me see if I can. I don't know how you reset the wavetable. Never really thought about it. Let me see if I can. If I added another Serum quickly. If you really want to get into the world of Serum. I'm not. Oh, I think I messed that sound up. Hold on, let's go back. Add Serum down here. Yeah, so say if you're designing a sound, the bog standard loading page is this, and you want to design your own wavetable from scratch, you click on this little pen tool here, and this is your oscillator type. And I was doing this the other day, I still get confused with it. I had to set it up, but you can kind of like draw little bits in to make it a bit more hectic, like a dubstep patch, or you can just make it real simple, and it's the grid. Do this.
Oh, there's that digit at the bottom, like, tell you what it's going to clip to?
Sorry?
What the zero you changed. Does that, like...
This is the grid. So I'm trying to make it so I can, yeah, so it's more, I can just draw stuff in quite straightforward. But then if I add another frame, I might want to adjust little bits of it. Put little glitches in this wave table.
Does it change anything of the sound? You make it three-dimensional, or is that just a different grid?
No, it doesn't really make it three-dimensional, but it'll morph between. I'll show you in a second. Let me just do one more, and then it should hopefully make sense. Do. Right. So once you've got it into that sort of state, you can crossfade or morph spectral, and basically, as it turns it into 256 of them. It basically, if I get out of this, it makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
It's now made it so I can scroll through this wavetable. If I press... Drop it an octave. So you can sit there and design your own wavetables, really. And it can be very effective, but just don't overcomplicate it too much. Especially to start off with. Does that make sense? Yeah, because you've got all the ones that are built in. You can load your own in, or you can actually draw some. So it's pretty crazy.
How do you get Massive? Do you just download like a...
You can, yeah, if you go online and just search for Massive wavetables, They're free to download. You'll get them from somewhere. Massive itself is sample based, believe it or not. There's little bits of audio inside Massive that you can't access, which are just little glitches and stuff like that, and they make up the wavetables of Massive. It's not like it does some mad computer science, you know, where it makes the sounds like inside the synth. It's actually playing the sounds. So that's like when you scroll through the wavetables, these are the sounds that are actually been loaded into the synth, these things, you know, that's the start of it and that's the end of it. So it's almost like a sampler in a weird way. Are you following what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, let's see, hopefully we've still got this. Serum. Oh, I deleted the MIDI, I'll just quickly go back. It sounds awful. Why does it sound so bad? Why did I load the wrong one? Sorry?
I don't know if that's the one. Is that the right one that's open?
I don't know.
Because it doesn't look like there's no like the little playhead's not going over there.
No. Maybe it was a different one. Is it that one? Maybe we lost the sound. That's really strange.
No, I think you
Wrong channel?
were before.
Yeah, this one.
Right, it should be the two above.
Uh,
Yeah,
this one?
Drag it back onto where it was, onto the funk channel.
yeah.
That one?
Yeah, then select.
And now click funk on the right. Oh no, you're on it now. No, you're not.
This one?
Yeah, click it.
There you go.
Ah. Okay. Let's just drop this an octave. What is it? That's, yeah. Okay. Let's go to the effects section. Add a bit of hyper. Bit of distortion, you can add some movement on the drive maybe. So I'm kind of trying to make a bass here that I want to resample. We could put the compressor in it, bit of gain. And you can see the white noise or the FM white noise. It's kind of becoming a bit much. Add the EQ in. Put that on the gain. I quite like that when we was messing around with that other sound. Then resonance, you can move the frequency as well. Maybe if we just put a little... and then maybe just go back to the filter. But you can see I'm kind of using the same sort of process of the other sounds to create something completely different. Maybe go to the multis. You have to turn the res up a bit, the morph, drive up a bit, and then maybe take that one and modulate the cutoff. Bring it that way. Go the other way. Sounds awful. It's kind of messing up the FM synthesis side of it. So if I bring the master down a bit as well. You can even like pitch the white noise, it'd have an effect on how the oscillator sounds. and you can make some pretty crazy sounds. Like, it's not the greatest sound in the world at all, but if I showed you some of the sounds that I was making the other day where I spent more time on it, I was taking the same process basically, and I ended up keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking, and I had a MIDI keyboard so I could write little riffs and stuff. I ended up making, let's see what this one, these are lots of different bits and bobs. No, it won't let me play it. I import it into Ableton, hold on. Huh? And so on and so on and so on. The white noise, that was reprocessed and stuff, and we haven't got time to really go through all of that. But it was kind of using the chain that I've got set up here anyway. But the FM, the white noise going through the FM, I'll show you. It'll make more sense if I actually open the synth. To get all that crunchy stuff that kind of makes the bass sound interesting, it's to do with the white noise, really, and splitting the bands. But like whether it's being sent via the FM to the oscillator A to create all that crazy, hold on, all that kind of weird fuzz on top. Let me solo it. There you go. You need that kind of weird crunch that gives it all that fuzz to create more movement. Go. If I move the pitch back up. And the way you end up keep processing it, you get that crazy top end that's slightly, you know, it's got different movement to the rest of the sub. Does that make sense? If the sub's moving in, or the rest, the main synth sound is moving in this sort of, you know, circular way, but then the high-end frequencies are just doing something completely different. You kind of get them sort of sounds that make you want to sort of screw your face up, you know. The white noise needs to be kind of separated from the main synth. Is that cool? Right, it's kind of a... I went off on a bit of a tangent, really, because obviously Cubase, I had to eject the dongle to put the power in. But we've covered some stuff in Serum. So have you got any questions about Serum? Or synths in general, really, because we're just using Serum because it's easy to see.
Like with that bass patch there, or that bass audio we just had, would you then like cut that up and rearrange it to make it?
Yeah, that's what I did. I literally hit record and with a MIDI keyboard and went mad. So like, you'll hear where it first started. Let me close Ableton because it won't let me play it otherwise. I don't want to save it. Hopefully this will play. It's not just QuickTime causing problems. Maybe I'll open it in. No. So I think QuickTime has caused it to, let me unplug this, not play out of the sound card. So I'm going to open up Cubase again. We're still on the screen, right? And we can go through these sounds in Cubase. But yeah, so I'd literally get a MIDI keyboard, play loads of notes. I assigned a filter to the mod wheel, so that's why it's all going. And then I just did like 5 minutes recording, messing around with things, changing the bits on Serum, just really experimenting, but recording the whole thing in as audio. Like if I was recording a vocalist or whatever, I'd set it up so I could record back in. So hopefully we'll get sound now. If not, we're going to have a break.
You'd play loads of different notes, you wouldn't just play one note.
I try and keep it around the scale of F, because at least I know...
When you come to do the sub for it, sort of.
Yeah, or you don't necessarily have to add a separate sub. You can, on a surface plays.
Yeah, you could use the
Yeah.
sub oscillator.
You could use the sub oscillator, but say you made a really fat sound and it had lots of sub in it, you could just split the frequencies, like when you're writing a tune, you could separate the sub or whatever. But sometimes I find adding a separate sub works.
Yeah, sometimes I find it hard because like, I'll make a really sick sound and then I won't know where to put the sub, like what key, and then I have to
Well,
sit
you probably, yeah, if you can't do that, you're probably best off separating the bands, as in duplicating the audio, take the bass out of one, and the other one and EQ just the bass in the other, and then balance them up. You could even compress the hell out of the sub to make it nice and fat and solid, especially if it's got lots of movement in it. So here you go. I literally went mad on the keyboard. It's just random mentalness, isn't it? And then once I found some bits that I liked, I chopped them all up, and just kept going. Really, I put some in Contact as well, and let's see what these sound like. And resampled them in Contact, which is a sampler. Which we can go through if we've got time. There's some more of them. It's basically very random. It's not very controlled. But you've got some sick sounds. Like all of these, I could make tunes like punk rock that we was going over a minute ago. I could just put these in new tunes. I was even making like weird, funky bass lines. So instead of just playing random stuff on the keyboard, I ended up writing a riff. I might turn this into a tune, I'm not sure. So. Just bounced out lots of different versions. So, you know, I kind of like the groove of it, but I'm not too sure about it. I don't know if the melody's strong enough yet. Kind of sounds like, that doesn't sound like I've made it in Serum, does it? No, it's a lot of distortion and everything else, but it almost sounds, to me, it sounds like a bass guitar that's been distorted. I think it's got too much noise on it in the top end. Sorry?
Sounds like a prototype's tune.
I suppose it does, yeah, a little bit, yeah. So, what was I going to say? So you end up just messing around and resampling, and that's how you get them crazy basses. Like, who likes crazy basses? Do you all like crazy basses?
Yeah.
It's kind of part of music, full stop, these days, isn't it? It's not, you know, it's in lots of music, so it'd be so sick if you could have loads of synths running with all the plugins running and your computer could handle it, but it can't, unfortunately. I found out recently I upgraded my studio Mac, and the way, just so you know, because it's quite important, is even if you get some of the most powerful computers in the world, it doesn't mean it's going to work well for audio, because it's real-time processing. Whereas video editing, it's not real-time, is it? You don't need 100 channels playing at once. It just needs lots of power to edit something when it wants. You know, it can be a few millisecond delay. But in music, it's real time. So if you've got a processor and it's got an in and an out, essentially, that's all the processor has, and you're firing all this real-time information at it, it kind of clogs the processor up. So it doesn't matter how much RAM you put in your machine, it's still based on the processor. And having more cores doesn't necessarily help the situation. What we really need as computer musicians is a processor that's like 50 gigahertz, but just one of them. You know what I mean? Something that's just really ultra powerful. Because the more cores it has, it can get confusing, because really it's still only got one in and out for audio because it's real time. Does that make sense? So you can spend $5,000 on a laptop and still be disappointed. Sometimes you can spend $1,000 on a laptop and it works fine. It's just almost like pot luck sometimes, you know, how they're designed. Even Apple, you know, it's not that great. But Logic is designed by Apple. Logic does work a bit better with more cores because they've got lots of money to throw it, make sure it does. It's okay. Ableton and Cubase are okay, but like multi-core, multi-core processing, yeah, that's relatively new. So something like Cubase or Ableton would have to redesign their whole packages from the ground up to support it properly, where Apple can just say, how much is that going to cost? Even if it was 20 million to redesign Logic, they'd be like, yeah, go on then. You know, Cubase or Ableton, you know, I'm not saying it costs 20 million, but it's almost like it's a massive expense. So it's quite hard for a lot of companies to get right. But I think Logic can get it right because they've got, well, they design the people who design the computers we all want to use, most of us, design the software. So they've got a bit of an advantage. Right, so we've got like 15 minutes left. Is that right? 15 minutes? Yeah. Okay, cool. So have you got any other questions about synthesis quickly? You sure? Everything covered. Okay, so what I've just shown you in Serum, you can apply to Massive as well. Same thing, take an LFO or an envelope and assign it to lots of different parameters, but keep it really simple. Don't overcomplicate it because, you know, some of you might make better sounds than me. You know, you might have different methods of doing it, but I find keeping it really simple is the key to it. So let's quickly open up punk rock again. I'm going to have to bypass the... Oh, I've opened the wrong one. I'm going to have to bypass the limiter on it because QuickTime doesn't like it. I'll turn that off. So he was covering clipping, demo version. So he's covering clipping, EQing ever so slightly, and limiting and group channels and effects. So we got to the bases, and there's lots of effects that I've bounced out as well, which I would have made in different synths that are all grouped, all layered up, just to make sure it's not too loud. And here you go, just like a wash of sounds, all put in key places as well. Some of these I got from like sample CDs, like film sample CDs, or sample packs they're called now, like action effects and stuff like that. Just to create like a bed of atmosphere really. Kind of normal stuff, tried to get them in the right key and so on. There's some synth, there's still a synth here. What is that sound? It's almost like, it's like a rising synth. Quite like that sound, I'm going to use that again. Which just sort of builds into the drop. And go down. We got the vocals from Pantera, which I cut up. This is actually the radio edit because it's got swearing in it.
More than that, I'm sick of people staring at us, man. Don't you look at me, mother shit.
Yeah, cause I'll just reverse some of the sounds in it. I've put a bit more distortion on his voice using an inflator and a camel crusher again. I do like that camel crusher, don't I? You don't realise how much you use the same plugin until you go through your projects. And then there was some, like, when the tune drops, just some, like, panning effects and stuff. And there was some stems as well. I took like a weird sound which sounded like a shaver from his interview. And that's sitting in the tune somewhere, like here, you might hear it. Hear it? It's like sitting in the background. I kind of liked it. And then...
I told you.
I like the way that sounds on this edit. Just sounds stupid, you know, but them sort of bits kind of make tunes to me. They're like the bits that I'm like, that bit's sick. Oh, there's one thing I want to talk to you about. You know, here you've got a reel-to-reel machine, studio reel. So I was here last year, and DBS kindly let me run a load of my drums through it, some more live-sounding drums made in Addictive Drums, and I went and took them home, or took them back to my studio, and clean them up. Well, I didn't even clean them up. I just chopped them up and I used them in this track. So I run it through the tape machine, got loads of different versions of it, and here you go. So this actually come from DBS. Yeah, it's only a snare drum, but it sounded sick. You know, when you're in the studio, it's got this nice metallic sound to it, and that was the tape machine that I was using, just running it through, clipping it a bit, you know, running it a bit hot. I was literally there in the morning before I come and done the lecture, so you'll hear it on the edit now. So yeah, I've got to big up DBS for the amazing sounding snare drum. But it's kind of like, you know, I haven't had access to one of them tape machines since. So if you're a producer, if you see something that you could potentially use, and you know, you obviously don't go and use it if you're not allowed, but like I was like, wow, I want to use that, and it kind of helps it with this track, because I started making it. I was like, oh yeah, them snares, you know, and it all kind of fits together. So it's always finding new and exciting things. I find sometimes if you get stuck using the same plugins, like Camel Crusher, if you use the same plugin over and over and over, or the same techniques, you kind of get stuck, like you really do. And it's really hard to get out of, like, you know, old habits. So even things like me using that tape machine or getting a recording of something, you know, going out of a pocket track or whatever can create, like, you know, more, it can be more inspiring to write better music. So last thing, I recorded a guitarist, very good guitarist. He's in my band Wicked City, which is we put on hold at the moment. But so I said, here's the riff. I've written it on a Massive or whatever. Recorded it as his, and then sent me back all these stems. And it builds up here. I put the vocal in as well.
Unless you want to fight, I want to see all you lose your mind.
I like the way he kind of like, it builds it up like a metal band. So cheesy. But he's a really good guitarist and he understands dance music. He's really like more funk hip hop, but he's such a good guitarist. Normally, I'd get something back from a guitarist and I'd be like, oh, I don't want to use that. It's, you know, but he knew to sort of give it a bit of cheese, but not too much. I was mad happy with it because guitars in drum and bass don't really work very well. Not normally. They kind of sound a bit like they shouldn't be in the same track. That's what I think, you know. Doesn't quite fit, but in this particular record it did. And then the last part of the record was mastering. And it's quite hard for me to show, you know, there's obviously all the elements of getting it all balanced and mixed and all that, but, you know, we can't go through that in a day. It's taken me like 10 years to get my records to sound how I want them, and I'm still not happy with them. But we can talk about, you know, the mastering stages of it now, and that's kind of the rough elements of it. So you've got all your group channels, I work a lot on the groups, get all the sounds to sound good, then kind of finish the record, and then probably listen to it 1,000 times, and then go back and change it again, and then again, and then again. But then I wanted to get this particular record sonically ridiculously loud. I wanted to prove a point to myself that I could make really not just loud, but really weighty music inside drum and bass, because, you know, my peers or in my equals now are people like Noisier or, you know, people who are pushing the boundaries of sound or songwriting like Subfocus or Chasing Status. You know, I have to use them as my you know, these are the people that are on my circuit. So I have to have, you know, I used to look up, how can you do that? Now I'm like, how can I not be better than them, but stand up next to them? How can I, you know, if I could be a lot better than them, how could I do it? You know, then you need to find a way. So with this particular record, I had to get the mix down amazing, but also get the mastering right. And I did that in lots of different ways. I went through loads of different limiters, loads of different EQs and everything, and I settled for, I ended up buying this plugin. I was like, right, I want to clip some of the transients off the music. I need like 1 or 2 dB before it even hits the mastering stage. So I'm catching any of the peaks. So the mastering equipment doesn't have to work very hard, the mastering software. Does that make sense? Even if it's just a rogue hi-hat that's a bit too loud, the clipping tool will just chop it off. I'm not using it in a dramatic way or a drastic way. So I used Ozone 7. There's 8 Ozone 8s come out now, which is absolutely amazing. And we're not going to be able to hear it, unfortunately, because it'll kill QuickTime. But there's a bit of EQ, and what I've done here is just using my ears in my studio, listen to the mix. Mastering, by the way, is not going to make your music sound good. It just makes it sound loud and finished. If your mix down's not very good, you've got to make it good. I used to think, if I send my stuff to mastering, it'd sound great, and then it'd come back and I'd be like, why doesn't it sound great? And I'd get really annoyed with them, and they'd be like, because it didn't sound great in the first place. So all I've done is, you can see on the right here, this is like 2 dB, yeah, of EQ, and I've put a 2 dB bump of bass, which is quite a lot in mastering. I've taken the frequency where the snare is, the fundamental, and given it a bit of EQ. It kind of glues it all together around the 200 hertz, so you've got the weight of the actual track and the weight of the snare together. I did a little cut there, probably because I thought I'd best do some sort of cutting. Probably doesn't actually do anything. Then, that's kind of the truth as well. And then this one's not really doing much, and I gave it a tiny little, what does it say, 0.3, 0.4 boost in the higher frequencies, which is like pretty crazy. Then I've taken like this exciter, and this band, the lower frequencies, is not even turned on. This is just exciting with a bit of tube, like the Camel Crusher. I like the sound of tube distortion, and just sort of like a very slight amount of saturation on the top end. Yeah, so you can kind of like just sort of roughs it up a little bit. You could hardly hear it. Bit of stereo imaging, which is basically expanding the stereo ever so slightly. My low frequencies I keep in mono. If you don't know why you keep low frequencies in mono, just read about it. It'd be untold reasons why to do it. Even this sort of lower mids I've kept as it was, and then just kind of expanded this whole area here, because our human hearing can hear this area quite well. Anything above 10K, we can hear it, but we can't make sense of it. It's kind of like weird fuzzy stuff. If you really want to think about EQing, get a track, put an EQ up on it, and listen to the bass on its own. Make sure the EQ doesn't clip, because it probably will if it's 0 dB. So turn the actual wave file down. Listen to the sub on its own. It's kind of inaudible. So after about 200 hertz, you know, it's where you can actually hear definition and hear instruments or hear sounds. And then if you solo 10K to 20K, you'll just hear weird noise. It's not what you think. I used to think, if I EQ at 10K, everything's going to sound great. But all you're doing is pushing out this, what they call sparkle. You know, this, you know, we can't actually hear it that well. You can't pick out things. So that's why I'm not really too fussed about after 10K. I've just sort of guessed it and just put a little boost in the stereo. So first of all, I had this limiter here, this maximizer, and I went for all the settings. I was really liking the clipping setting on here. And then I ended up settling for the transient setting because it actually was a bit smoother and a bit cleaner. And then this tune is ridiculously loud and punchy, and it's still got some dynamic to it, kind of. And I got it mega loud, and I was playing it next to everyone else's mega loud tunes. Like, I'm not talking just, I found in random tunes. I was going through, and from being an active DJ, I know which tunes sound mega loud in clubs. So I was getting the Noisier Dead Limit. I was getting some DC Breaks tunes, and a few other artists, and I was comparing A and B and A and B and A and B. And I was like, yeah, I've got it really loud. And then I was like, oh, what about this other limiter? So I ended up going back and putting this vintage limiter before it, which it probably just limits like 0.3 dB, but it's another tube, tube setting, which actually it made the tune sound even better, only slightly, but enough to notice, and it also made it louder. So adding a combination of the two limiters made my tune get extra loud. So does that make sense? Unfortunately, I can't play it with the mastering on because it won't play any sound because the processor can't handle it. But I might be able to download a copy of it quickly, and then you can compare the two, say between Noisier and this track. But it was probably my best mix down. It's a little pushed. I can tell it's a little pushed, but in a good way. But it's ridiculously sonically in a club. As soon as it comes on, you think, wow, that sounds massive. Not just in the term loudness, in all the frequency content, in all the width, everything about it. It's got definition, separation. It's just one of them tunes that come out really good, and I'd say it's probably one of my better ones that I've actually done. So I'm not going to save that. I don't think I've got a copy here. Let me just double check.
What level do you usually master to? Is it just 0?
Yeah, you master to 0.
So are there any exceptions to that for you?
Well, it's a subject that, yeah, if you're mastering for clubs, we're hitting 0 dB and we're squashing it up to try and get as loud as it can be in the sense of RMS. If you don't know what RMS is, I don't know what RMS is. It confused the hell out of me. It's some mathematical formula, but I know how to read it. Yeah, you guys know more than me. I've asked a few people that know, and they've explained it to me, and then I've gone, yeah, I don't get it. So, but what I do know is metering. When I'm metering RMS, I know what I need to hit to get my tunes to be loud. But so that's fine. But if you're now mastering for streaming, they use a completely different loudness metering, as you guys would probably know. Or if you're mastering for TV, they use a different mastering amount. So I think I've got Ozone 8 on here. See if it'll open. And it helps you. So if you was gonna, say if we was gonna, this is gonna sound awful, so I'm not gonna play it. We're gonna remaster someone else's tune. I'm gonna master this Chase and Status tune because it's not squashed to hell. So you've got a mastering assistant now. You click on it and it gives you a streaming option. So that will set the RMS setting for you. So it's not completely trashed. So the problem is, if I just send a club mastered version with like maximum RMS to Spotify, they would take my track and turn it down. Literally just turn it down because it's too loud. You will then notice against a tune that's been mastered properly for Spotify that my tune sounds like a pile of rubbish. It's limited, squashed, there's no dynamics, where the tune that has dynamics and has been mastered correctly for streaming will sound all open and great and you want to listen to it. Mine, it's almost like the same with SoundCloud. They just turn it down and you basically got to now master, if you're releasing music, if you really want to, if it's not just club music, do one master for the club, making it super loud, one master for streaming, really, Spotify, iTunes, whatever it is, Apple Music, but even if you got Ozone 8 or you just read up about it, or even better, learned how to do it properly here, I'm just going to hit next and it's going to analyse it. You'll figure out the correct settings for it. I've got to play the audio.
What level do you like next to before you master?
Sorry?
So before you're going to master, what level are you mixing to? Like -3 or -4?
Oh, we're into the limiter?
Yeah, so before the master, what?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So, yeah, so it depends really. Sometimes you can clip the limiter. If you want saturated, dirty sounding tunes, if you're making more dancefloor stuff, you probably don't want to do it and you want like a good, at least 2 dB of headroom. I find like with how I've set my mix up, and it's very complicated, all the levels are meticulously changed and everything, around -2 dB works better with ozone for how I've done it. -4, I end up having to make the limiter work a bit harder. So it's all a little balancing game. I kind of want it going in so it doesn't have to limit that much. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I mean, if you send it off to like a
Professional master would say -4, -6, which is fine, you know.
if you can do it yourself, you want to push it a bit more.
A professional master would never, ever be able to get my tune as loud as I got it because I've spent hours doing it, you know. They would never get it as loud. They could, if they was watching this, think, right, I'm going to get it as loud and actually spend a lot of time on it. But they've got a job to do and they've got to get it in and get it out the door, really. Where I just wanted to make the loudest tune I could possibly make that still sounded good. So I end up now mastering all my own stuff because I've got full control over it. Mastering engineers, really good ones, you know, are amazing, and I'm not knocking them whatsoever. But I just wanted full control over my own music, and the sort of dark art of mastering isn't really much more than getting your tune to sound loud and finished. You know, if you're making music that's got errors in it and you're expecting a mastering engineer to fix them, like, you know, your mix downs or your sample choices, they probably can do a very good job at it, a lot better job than me. But that's not the answer, really, is it? It's about to get your music to sound amazing and then put really just a limiter on the end of it. That's the answer to it, you know. And then you don't need mastering engineers. Honestly, I've probably spent hundreds, if not thousands, on masters I've never put out. Because I thought they'd do a better job than me. But it's just, you know. It's also, if I got one of your tracks and you said mix it down to me, I would mix it down how I thought it should sound. And then you might be like, what, you done that? Why have you done that? And that's a bit like mastering sometimes. You send a track off and they send it back and it's like, why have you done that? I didn't want it to sound like that. Did you not listen to my reference file? That's what I think. And then I'm like, I'm not putting that out. And then I've got to give them 100 quid. I'm like, oh dear.
Do you know when you're talking about having multiple processors?
Yeah.
Like quad core and stuff? I'm getting a lot of clipping, but it's like more like glitching.
Yeah, if you can change your buffer size, right?
Yeah, I've changed that, like both ends, either end. Does that mean it's my sound card?
No, it's probably your processor. Look, what sequence are you using?
I'm using FL.
There would be like a little tool somewhere in FL that would tell you how the program's operating. Like, it'll tell you if it's maxing out the processor or not. Google it, there will be one. Yeah, this is Erb N Dub. You've been watching my tutorial for DBS Music, and I hope you enjoyed it.